Hi, guys, and welcome back to another exciting installment of Wines. New World Wines in particular, and we're still talking about USA. We got done with California, which is the biggie. We talked about New York, which is a large producer, not the biggest. Washington is bigger. Oregon, it depends with Oregon and New York. They go back and forth between larger producers, so no matter where you look up information, you'll see conflicting information. The reason why I include Oregon on here is I think they have some of the finer wines because they do a lot of experimental growth with different vinous vinifera and non-vinous vinifera grapes for winemaking. Once again, we talked about in America about mission grapes, especially in California, and I was looking them up. They apparently have died off, meaning extinct. They really don't know exactly what the mission grape was. They assume it was originated in Spain. It could have been hybrided with American varieties. It's kind of interesting because I do like wine history, and it's very interesting that the history of the mission grape itself, which was very important from Central America through all Mexico and all the way up to San Francisco, that it doesn't exist anymore, or it's not even known its exact variety. Now, don't forget, this is a long time ago where they did a lot of high breeding and not really a lot of record keeping. So, but I thought that was interesting. Washington State is the largest producer next to California by far. Known for good wines. They do produce good wines. And Texas is coming up, which I find very interesting because I did live in Texas. I've been through these areas, Washington and Oregon, and I lived in Texas. And I've had Texas wines before, and they never really, but that was it's quite a few years ago. It's 15, 20 years ago. So I'm sure the wine producing now is much, much better. Let's move on to Washington State. Now, Washington State is a very large state. In the picture here, let me pull up the cursor. That's Mount Hood. This is the tallest mountain in southern United States, the lower part, not counting Alaska. It doesn't look very big there, but boy, it's very impressive when you get near it. It just goes straight up. Once again, we'll talk a little about terroir in each of these areas. They have very unique terroir, but if you notice too, just even from this one picture, they're much gentler. South Africa, you remember South Africa, huge mountains, things like that. This is a much more smooth farm area. Just to put it in perspective, right? Here's Washington State up here. Follow the cursor if you can. See the capital, Seattle. I think you guys all know about Seattle. Vancouver's up here. It's not on this map. It could be on this map. I'm not sure. I can't see underneath the cursor there. That's Washington State. Here's Oregon and California. These are all AVAs. So you can see California has a big amount of AVAs. Oregon has some here along the coast, and Washington has more inland. We did talk about New York. Let me go over to the other side. Here's New York. Here's where the Culinary Institute of America is, the Hudson River Valley, Finger Lakes District, the Erie District, the Lake Placid District. Okay, these are the areas we talked on. And these are the only areas, but I was very interested. Let's go down to Texas here, because I was in Dallas. And this is the Red River Valley. I could see this being an AVA. This is a river here, and it's very nice. It's very pretty. Very wet, believe it or not, for Texas. And it's a river, so it has moisture. And you'll see some interesting terroir when we talk about Oregon, too. Very, Washington State and Oregon, very interesting terroir. But there's quite a few AVAs now in Texas, so hold on. That might be the next one to study, that's for sure. But we're going to be over here on the West Coast. Right, this is called the West Coast of America, Seattle, Oregon, and I've been through all these areas, so I can guide you quite well through it. And there's Mount Hood again. Once again, it's a very rugged but very, very nice state. And it doesn't get a lot of snow. Mount Hood has snow almost all year round, but the lower area, because being close to the ocean, it doesn't. Washington ranks second in the United States behind California in wine production, which is pretty good if you think about it. By 2017, the state had over 550,000 acres, or 222 square kilometers, of vineyards, which is a fair amount. It's a big state, but there's a lot of mountains, so that's a lot of vineyards. Very nice countryside. There's Mount Hood once again in the back. There are around 940 plus wineries located in the state. As I was doing my research, I found an awful lot of different numbers, and I picked the Chamber of Commerce's number, which was 940. But I'm sure there's more and more as every year goes on. That's for sure. Once again, we talk a little about terroir. The Cascade Mountains have an awful lot to do with this. The majority, 99.9% of the grape production takes place in the shrub steppes eastern half. And once again, I'll pull up a map again. The next one, you go to the map, you can see. This is a very unique terroir, where half the state is very wet and foggy, and the other half is very, very dry. Very, very dry. This is called steppes. There's no trees growing in these areas, anything like that. And it's perfect because it gets an awful lot of sunshine. Viniculture in the state is also influenced by the long sunlight hours. Viniculture is the art of growing grapes for wine production. That was way back in the beginning in the introduction. That's a word you really should know, viniculture. On average, 2 hours a day, more than 2 hours a day in California growing season, and consistent temperatures. So once again, 2 hours a day, consistent temperatures do produce a very stable crop. Now with wines and grapes and Vinus vinifera itself, fluctuation, changes in temperature, it does produce more interesting wines. Germany is known for very hot days and cold nights, so that's strong fluctuation. Here, that's very consistent, but then once again, it's very controllable. The early years. The earliest grapevines planted in Washington State were at Fort Vancouver in 1825 by traders working for the Hudson Bay Company, but it's not known for sure whether the wines were ever produced from these plantings. Just a side note, I don't know if you're familiar with this company. It's a British company. They have a very interesting history of exploration, gold hunting, beaver trapping. It's kind of interesting. They opened up all of Canada, the Hudson Bay Company. They made their own axes, their own blankets, and things like that. A very little interesting bit of history. The first people who definitely known to produce wines were German and Italian immigrants who planted their grapevines in Washington during the 1860s and 1870s. Just a side note, my mother's side is from Germany, and they came to Montana, a neighboring state, around 1865. So part of this story is part of my family story too. They didn't go all the way to the coast. They stopped off at Montana, which is the state next to it, next to Idaho. The roots of modern Washington wine industry can be traced to the middle of the 20th century, when a group of professors from Washington State University turned their home winemaking operation into a commercial. Now, once again, this is really, we're talking 1960s, that the professors got together who used to make wine in their home and said, well, the terroir here is not bad. Maybe we can do something more about it. I researched the professors a bit. They were chemistry professors, mostly sciences, and I guess agricultural sciences, and they got together and were basically like a home circle of making wines. And they thought, well, this is pretty good. And they bought some land and they expanded out and they did more and more. And then they realized that this could actually be a profitable business. And they became quite wealthy because back then, Washington State, and even today, is pretty much open. It's one of the least populated states in America. Once again, we always try to talk about terroir, and once again, the best thing to do is to look at a map. It's the best way to really talk about terroir. Let me take out the cursor here. Cursor disappeared. I'm sorry, this takes a little time here. Let's see, where we go. There we go. Okay, no, I don't want that. And a little dot. I want... I'm stuck with the dot. Okay, this, what I'm outlining here, is the Cascade Mountains. These are, in the pictures, you see these huge mountains in the background. They're actually not as big as the Rockies, but they're very big. The terroir here is split between this extremely dry, desert-like area here. This is like a desert. It's very, very dry. To this very green, wet, almost, it gets cold, but it doesn't get freezing there. Tropical area here. So the terroir is very, very different in Washington State. The state we're going to be talking about next is Oregon down here. And this mountain range does extend down. It goes down this way. And then here is a coastal, we call it coastal range. Not a big range, not big mountains, but bigger. Here at Tillamook, if you go to Costco, you can get Tillamook cheese. I'm sorry, I crossed it off. Can I erase that? Let's see if I can erase that. I can't seem to be able to erase that, but let me pause it for a second. Resume. Maybe I could do it this way. Here, eraser. Well, okay, let me go back. I guess I have to continue on. I am sorry. We'll get back to another map. I'm sorry about that. Terroir. Once again, the Cascade Mountain Range is definitely a feature in both geography and climate of Washington State. Once again, these mountains are very beautiful. If you look up the word cascade in English, and you look up in an English dictionary, this right here, Cascade Mountains. Look up the word cascade. Cascade means to fall or to tumble down. So they're known to be very, very steep. Steep meaning very high, very quickly. That's why I say Mount Hood goes straight up in the air. It's amazing. It's a very, very pretty country. Very, very wild. There's areas there that have been unhiked, unwalked on because they're just so hard to get to, hard to access to. They're very, very nice. This is on the western side of the Cascades. The ocean is behind us. The ocean is this way, down this way, and then the Cascade Mountains form here. So here's a pretty much lush green area, as opposed to the other side of the mountains turns into what they call steppes or a desert-like. Kind of like Mongolia in many, many respects, the kind of same kind of lands. So the state has two very, very separate terroirs. Now, 99% of the grapes are grown in this area, in the drier area, but there's once again more research into this area too. It's a little too wet apparently for grape growing. It serves as a dividing line the wet maritime influenced climate of the western part of the state from the drier desert-like climate of the eastern half. The mountains themselves create a shadow rain. And shadow rain's an interesting little phenomenon. It might even appear in Korea because you do have a certain amount of mountains. And let me pull up a map here. Shadow rain does. Now you have warm, moist air on the Pacific coast, sunshine, things like that. you have a easterly wind that blows up the mountainside, rising to air that cools and condenses. As the dry air advances, it's kind of like a mist. It's not a heavy rain. The shadow, you know what a shadow is. Shadow's not a clear image. Shadow is a light coating. So it creates a very unique terroir, maybe in the world, for grape production. And it does happen a little at Oregon, not as much, just because the mountain range is much higher here. So the west side here, Korea's over this way, by the way. Korea's in this direction. Here, oops, that's west. That's going towards Korea. This is the Pacific Ocean. We share this ocean. So here it's very, and Seattle, Washington, I think you know, is known for its rainy climate. So once again, a lot of Koreans in Seattle. And Seattle's a great city. Once again, home of Starbucks, home of a lot of things. Microsoft too, I think. But anyway, creates a shadow rain. So here it's very damp, foggy, wet. Here, dry air with light moisture coming down. So it's a very unique terroir. Grape varieties. Once again, they are a larger producer, and they do produce pretty much the grapes that you expect. Today, there are over 80 grape varieties grown in Washington State, but primary grapes used for production of wines are from the Vinous vinifera family of grapes. Now, one thing about New World wines, and when we talk about Chile, which will be our next country, they're like the AVA doesn't really control what you grow, when you grow, and how you grow it. The AVAs in America are very relaxed. So there are 80 types of grapes grown there, mostly Vinous vinifera for wine production, but they grow a lot of other grapes. There's thousands of varieties of grapes. I can pull up a chart. Maybe I should pull up a chart next time on how many grapes are out there. A tremendous amount. Vinous vinifera family is huge. But there's some non-Vinous vinifera grapes that are used for wine production that do add certain flavors and characters to wine. So they're very important. The main grapes used in wine production in Washington are Cabernet Sauvignon, Riesling, Chardonnay, Merlot, and Syrah. Now, once again, these names you've heard before several times. These should be no surprises. These are very common names. But also, plantings of Cabernet Franc, Grenache, Melbac, Pinot Gris, or Pinot Grigio is the term I like to use for this one here. Pinot Grigio is the same one. This makes a very nice varietal wine that I think you guys would really enjoy. Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Temporero, Vongadier, Barbera, Chenin Blanc, Gewürztraminer, Nebbiolo, Petit Syrah, Pinot Noir, Sangiovese, and Zinfandel. These are mostly, not all, but mostly are, well, it's about split, but red and white grapes, that's for sure. Pinot Noir is a very famous one in Oregon State. They grow a lot of that. Well, the idea I put this in, and this is not a full list of because there are 80 types of grapes that grow there. It shows the variety of grapes that they're trying to grow and experimenting with. This is one thing about the reason why I'm including these two states in this lecture series is because they are new wineries. They are new, since the 60s, which is fairly new when you consider France has been growing grapes since the Romans. They haven't had a new wine system since BC. They've been making wines. That this is a very new thing. So they're not stuck with tradition. They can apply and follow through with almost anything that they want to grow and to try because there is no regulation. Plus, their terroir is extremely unusual. Once again, the consistent temperatures in the Eastern Valley, the dry area, you can plant and maintain good crops quality without worrying about frost or dry. They do have a water problem, that's for sure. The shadow rain does make a good amount of moisture, but once again, Grapes are a very wet fruit, so they do require an awful lot of irrigation. That might be a new word, irrigation, watering of fields, like rice. Without water, you have no rice. Now, obviously, grapes don't need that much water, but they do need a lot, especially when it comes to the hot seasons. Either that, or you're not going to produce good fruit. The grapes that are used like Vinus vinifera, once again, you see the pictures of them, and I showed you pictures of them. They're fairly small. They're not very juicy. Like when you eat a table grape, there's a lot more moisture in table grapes. So they squeeze out in your mouth. Grapes for wine, Vinus vinifera ones, are kind of meaty. Meaty meaning like goji. There's a lot of solid to it, not a lot of liquid. So it takes a lot of grapes to produce wine. They say it takes, this is a fun fact, 600 grapes to make a liter of wine. Now, I don't know, because once again, Zinfandel is a fairly large grape. Sauvignon Blanc is a very small grape, so I don't know what they mean by 600 grapes, but that's a fun thing that people talk about when they talk about wine and wine production. Here's the AVAs. And let me see here, Interstate 90, Spokane, Washington, Idaho. I came in this way, I drove in this way, and this whole area here is all desert. It's very dry. There's no agriculture here. It's very high, actually. High meaning elevation-wise, right? Then you come down into this Columbia Valley, and it really starts turning green and lush. And this, Columbia Valley is, you can see, is the largest area. These are Walla Walla, which is a very funny name, but it's an Indian name, is really a good quality wine. I think they probably have one of the better wines out of there. But once again, back on my journey, I come around this way, come through this way, come to 90, and up here, there's the mountains. So you're going straight up, and it's once again, once you leave the valley area, it's very dry again. It's crispy, and you're going over these mountains, snow-capped mountains and things like that. Then you come to this point here, and it's like a fairy tale. It's all green, large trees and streams and brooks and the ocean. It's really, really pretty. It still sticks in my mind that it was quite a drive, that's for sure. So anyway, when I came through this area, it was stopped and spent the night here. Not really wine touring, but stayed near a winery, went to a few tastings along the way, because they give free wines, and it's always a fun thing to do. And it's very interesting. And then we got into the Seattle area because I had friends there. We stayed with Seattle friends there, and they took us to some of the smaller wineries in the area here. But they're more like show wineries. They're very boutique. Boutique wineries are small. They only make vintage. They maybe make 20 cases a year. They don't do a lot. And usually fairly expensive and very, I guess generally good. So it was a very interesting trip. Washington State is also the home to plantings of some of the lesser known Vinus vinifera varieties that are used in wine production for some experimental wines and blendings. And this is very important, I think, in the future, because once again, they're dealing with climate change in a biological way. They're dealing with grapes that will grow well, things that will do, once again, better in changing climates. And plus produce more interesting wines. Don't forget that, once again, we haven't really talked about old world wines that much. We did talk about the overview, but when we get into France, France is not flexible. Flexible means they don't change. They produce a certain wine, and they produce that same wine now for the last 200 years, and that's how they can get the label Grand Cru. And Grand Cru is considered a very, it's like an award from the government. To have a Grand Cru designation to your winery means you've been producing wines for quality wines, same wines, for the last couple of 100 years. The point is, wine tastes have changed. People like you, China, are the new customers. And maybe you don't like a super hot, dry Cabernet Sauvignon. Maybe you might not like a Grand Cru, but you might like a Chenin Blanc from Rattlesnake Hills in Washington State because it's a little softer, a little lighter. They do grow a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon in Washington State, only because it is a very popular grape in America. People do like it. So, but the new people, meaning you guys, I don't know if Cabernet Sauvignon is the wine for you. Well, that's the end of Washington wines. We're going to continue on into Oregon wines. Oregon is the state next to it. Washington State is a fairly new wine producer, like Oregon. Oregon itself, a large state. Once again, with very interesting terroir, but you can even see on this map, the terroir is very kind of similar. They don't get the shadow rain, though. That's for sure. Not as much, at least. To put in perspective, now we're down here. Let me outline the state here. There's Oregon. We just did Washington. I put these two together only because there's really not, since being new states, there's not a lot of information on it. Where in New York, per se, they were there's a lot more. It's been planted earlier. They had a lot more experience with immigrants, especially the French Huguenots that produce quality wines very quick. If you notice now, this whole West Coast. Once again, let me outline California also. Right, this was all Spanish territory here. Well, what was part of Spain, but this part here and up north here was Russia. And if you think of Russia, you don't really think of wines. They had no interest in Vinus vinifera or anything like that. They controlled that area for the fur trade. When the animals were trapped out, when there was no more fur, they just slowly went back up to Alaska, which is very interesting history because a lot of America could have been this whole area I'm outlining now. Down here was all Spanish. Spain controlled all this, plus Florida. These were all Spanish colonies. This was all French territories. So it's kind of interesting. You think of America, and this was England. New England was just from Boston down to Virginia here. This was only England's little piece of land there. This was all part of Canada before America's independence. So the United States, I mean, you could be learning Spanish or French. Just happen to pick up English as a little side history there, something you should know. Ah, yeah, the Conestoga wagons, right? Wine has been produced in Oregon since the Oregon Territory was settled in 1840. Now, late 1840s. That is not that long ago. In America, before you became a state, you were called a territory, and a territory didn't have really the rights of a state. A state has a governor and everything like that. A territory was just a plot of land. People could, once again, like my great-grandparents went to Montana Territory. You just claim a piece of land, it's yours. You get enough people, you start a government, and you become a state. So 1840, if you think of it in Joseon period, during the Joseon period, 1840 is really late Joseon period. Korea was a very developed country back in the 1840s, where you think Oregon itself, it's just becoming settled. Thousands of people moved overland with these wagons. Grapes were first planted in the Oregon Territory in 1847. Valley View is the first recorded winery established by Peter Britt in the late 1850s in Jacksonville. Now, once again, this is interesting too because this had really nothing to do with the church, as opposed to California. Everything had to do with the church and the mission system. This was just Peter Britt decided to open a winery. Winemaking only been significant industry in the States since the 1860s. They still do a lot of, this is called boutique wineries. They do things a lot by hand still. They don't make a lot of wine. They're trying to make quality wines, which is admirable. You have to admit that's a good thing to do. They do a lot of hand pressing. Obviously, this is hand pressing, which is really hard work. If you make it a red wine, it's a really good way of getting a good bloody red wine out of it, that's for sure. Let's talk a little about the terroir. Once again, in similar, here's Mount Hood again, which shows up. Mount Hood is so big that from Washington State, you can see it everywhere around this area. It's so tall. But this coast range, the Siskiyou Mountains, the Coast Range. These are not very tall, but they are a mountain range which protects it from the Pacific Ocean. This way is Korea once again. Korea is off this way. Actually, more Russia is that way, but still, it's in that direction. It's in the westerly direction. And then you got the Cascade Range here. Now, it's not as high as the mountains here. Up in Washington, these are very, very big mountains. They get kind of flattened out around here. So it's a little different. And you can see there's a lot more water in this here in the areas. The major AVAs, Portland is the capital. Salem is the capital. Portland's the big city. These are all AVAs. And once again, it's split. This AVA is actually, it's considered Oregon, but it goes into both states. And the Columbia River is a very, very big, very, very nice river, actually. As you can see now, once again, without going into the chemistry of it, you can see the land is more gentler, a little smoother, not as high mountains. There are some tall, but not like the Cascades. That's for sure. It's more of a lusher, greener, smoother rolling hills. They do get their fog and their shadow rain and the mountain range, but still a lot of bottomland. Really nice, very gentle, more green. That as obviously Oregon was desert, is very, very dry. Both states are very pretty, and it's just interesting how they're so different. The terroirs on them to each other. You see morning fog is very important. Once again, climate has a lot to do with the hot days, cold nights, sea breezes, things like that are very important for wine production. The big producer is the Willamette Valley, Oregon's leading wine region. It has 2/3 of state wineries and vineyards, and is nearly a home of 600 wineries. It is recognized as one of the premier Pinot Noir producing areas of the world, and they are known. If you look for any wine from Oregon, look for their Pinot Noirs. They seem to do that quite well. The overall climate boasts a long, gentle growing season, warm summers and cool evenings, mild winters, followed by very, very long springs. And that's very important, once again, for fruit production. All that is, if you think a gentle season, they have warm summers and cool evenings, and that is always seems to be a key when it comes to wine production. Mild winters, so the plants don't die off. They should sleep. They should be dormant. You can't grow grapes in tropical climates because they need to go dormant. Oh, that might be a new word. Dormant means to sleep. To sleep, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of anything else. Bears do it in the winter. They go to sleep for a long time. So, Vinus vinifera must have dormant times on. So you must have a winter. But a mild winter means that you're not going to have a lot of kill-off. A lot of things won't die. Long springs, once again, before it gets hot. A lot of leaf production, a lot of fruit production before they start ripening. So it's a very, very good growing season. I'll pull up the map here of the AVAs. Once again, very similar to Washington State here, because their AVAs go right up to here, and same over here. These will go right up connected to these AVAs. So they do have some over AV. This map doesn't show. There's some AVAs over here, and there's a few here. But Willamette Valley, this is, if you buy a bottle of wine in Korea, that's Willamette Valley, it's going to be Oregon's premier wine, that's for sure. Their wineries are very, very much like California in the way that the hills are gentler and smoother, slower rolling. They're not so rough. The terroir is much finer for most production. In ideal years, the maritime climate provides best conditions possibly for growing cooler climate grapes, which Oregon is best known for, the Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, most red grapes like cooler weather. They do seem to prefer that, where white wines and white grapes seem to prefer warmer weather. Now, that's not true with all varieties. Gewürztraminer, which is a German variety, is a white wine that does like a cold winter. So it's not, you can't say it's all across. But maritime climate, this is very important with almost all the places we looked at so far. Maritime, right, means along the coast. California along the coast. Washington State along the coast. Long Island vineyards along the coast. The Great Lakes along water. So water has a lot to do with it. The Bordeaux region of France, which I find is the best, is along a maritime climate. So it's a very important point. And so is Korea. That's what I'm talking about. Very, very nice areas. Very pretty. Rolling hills. Not very steep. Oregon versus Washington. Once again, since this is a smaller areas of wine production, and you'll see in the next couple graphics, Washington State produces 11 million cases, as opposed to 1.5. So to get an Oregon wine in Korea is not impossible. Costco has them every now and then. You can find them occasionally, but once again, Oregon doesn't really produce a lot for number 3. Not an awful lot. And once again, between New York State and Oregon, they bounce around between the difference. What I wanted to really point out here is that the Pinot Noir is grown much, much more than the Cabernet Sauvignon. Merlot, Chardonnay, Riesling, and Syrah, these words we use a lot. Okay? Pinot Grigio, which is the number 2 vineyard grown there, is a fairly not known grape. Unknown Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris. It depends how you want to pronounce. There's 2 spellings to it. I think is a growing wine. You would like that. It's sweeter than a Chardonnay. Once again, I know you guys like sweet, so Riesling's a fairly sweet one too. White wine, white grape, red grape, red, white, red. Just in case you want to know. What I thought was interesting is sunny days on average, right? Oregon, as opposed to, and this is in that dry area, of course. It's going to have a lot more sun. That's pretty good. 290 days of sunshine. This is the bottom half of that graphic. I just wanted to put that in. What they're known for, no wines with top scores yet. Washington wines have earned the highest ratings. Now, producing a lot, do you have a chance of doing it? Grapes are not that important. Number 4, number 3. These areas produce more fruit and things like that. So they're a growing area of wine production. Wines, it does make a lot of money, but once again, it's just a beginning thing over there. Yeah, we talked about California. The annual wine production by state, California, 89%, right? And then look at Washington, 4. This one has New York as number 3, right? Oregon as number 4, excuse me. Once again, I've seen, no matter what web page you go to, what site, New York and Oregon seem to jump around between each other. So I assume actually really that New York is probably like, 2.5, and then Washington is 1.7. They're probably closer than this particular chart. But the reason why I threw this up here is look at California. Look at California. Oh man, they really dominate. So when we talk about tastings and stuff like that, and if we do taste, if I go to Costco and they have an Oregon or a Washington one, I would sure pick one up. That's for sure, because they are hard to come by. California wines are fairly easy to come by. New York you can get some sparkling wines sometimes at Costco from New York, but it's very rare. New York State makes good German style wines. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Study hard, be careful, and I will catch you later.